Welcome to the Find Your Leadership Confidence podcast with Vicki Nedling. You are about to discover impactful lessons that help you grow as an individual, grow your confidence, and find the positive and good within you, so you powerfully and authentically become the best version of yourself. Be sure you visit our website at www.findyourleadershipconfidence.com. While you're there, subscribe to us via your favorite network. Now tune in, get ready, and enjoy the journey of emerging as a leader of exception in the 21st century.
Welcome, everyone, to the Find Your Leadership Confidence podcast. I'm your host, Vicki Nedling, coming to you from Roswell, Georgia. The goal of this podcast is to bring topics and guests that will empower you to become that confident leader and take your business and your life to the next level. Today, I am going to have my guest, Momoko Uno. And let me tell you about Momoko. She is a doctor of integrative medicine, certified functional medicine practitioner, I can say that, licensed acupuncturist, board certified herbalist, and a master's degree in spiritual psychology with an emphasis on consciousness, health, and healing. She has publicized 2 books and is the owner and founder of Omni Wellness. Momoko wrote her first book after she almost died during a 2-week solitary confinement in Australian quarantine when her mother passed away. Her second book, a fiction that was inspired by her patience and work with complex trauma and its complicated implications on health. Momoko's greatest passion is to bring humor, light humor, and all the challenges that come with our lives. So being able to laugh at that is a great way for us to get past it. So she believes laughter is the medicine that will bring sense of humor and essential coping mechanisms. Her hope is that through her books and by sharing stories that we can connect with more as a human race, we can heal collectively. So today we are going to talk about overcoming trauma and finding resilience, strength, and joy. As you know, I love to have guests that talk about this because it seems everybody has something in their lives that's caused some sort of trauma. And I'm so happy that we're going to be able to talk about how if we could just laugh through it. So please, it's my extreme pleasure to have Momoko Uno as my guest. Please welcome her.
Thank you so much for having me.
It is wonderful to have you. You know, it's something that I think got me through a lot of things when I was young. Being really sensitive to things, but knowing that if I could make people laugh, it helped me get through it. And I always tell a story about I was in a bus accident when I was in high school, and our school bus went over a small, not cliff, but a small mountain, like, I don't know, hill, we'll say hill,
Oh, no.
that was going, it's about 5 feet down. And so it went on its side and then it was upside down.
Gosh.
And so nobody, surprisingly, miraculously, nobody got hurt badly. People had some broken arms and things, and the driver was probably the one that was most injured. But as we're all standing around for an ambulance to come, and again, you know, we are in high school, but we still had no parents, and it's scary and everything.
Yeah.
And you could see all the terror and the sad looks on people's faces. I had a school uniform that I had to wear, and I wore pantyhose. And I got a run in my pantyhose, like a huge hole in my pantyhose. And I was like, oh my God, look at my, how can I go to school with this? And it's like, oh, Vicki, You're not even going to go to school. You just had this traumatic thing, but it made everybody laugh. And it was, maybe they were laughing at me as much as
Oh,
with me, but it was still to break the tension. So I really do believe that, just like a good book or a good story, in those most traumatic, tense moments, someone like a Bruce Willis says something that makes you laugh, and it eases the stress and eases the tension.
absolutely. I'm
So
sorry you had to go through that. That's awful.
now it's something to just a story to tell,
Yes.
but not about me. Let's
Yeah.
talk about first two easy questions I always ask. First, where do you live? Where do you call home right now?
Yes. So my work is in New York City, but I live in Westchester, New York. That's just a little bit north of the city.
Very good. And so we gave a little bit of your journey. I left out some parts. I gave a little tease about it, but talk about your journey that has led you to where you are today.
Do you mean as a medical practitioner?
Well, doing
Yeah.
what you're doing right now. So your focus on finding, overcoming trauma, finding resilience, strength, and joy, as a lot of doctors just treat an illness, but don't really focus on those other things. At least some of the doctors, not
Yes.
everybody.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you for clarifying that. I didn't want to launch from I'm 3 years old, my first memory. So I'll keep it a little shorter.
Mhm,
So I think in terms of treating trauma, that was much more of a slower realization. I didn't even realize probably when I started practicing about 25 years ago that this is what I was really up against. It wasn't
mhm.
really in people's consciousness. We didn't really talk so much about
Right,
trauma back
right.
then. And then, we had 9/11 and I was pretty much a few blocks away from all of that. And I
Mm,
think that probably was a major turning point in my life where everybody around me had
yeah.
significant trauma.
Hmm.
And I just saw my patients have all sorts of different symptoms related from that trauma.
Yeah.
And since then, I've watched people have all sorts of different trauma, not just from 9/11, but some of that trauma continued for many years for patients. And then I started connecting the dots between childhood trauma and then all sorts of different types of trauma throughout people's lives, if it's personal, family, careers, or something else, like in your case, an accident, and started seeing that trauma can affect people's health, not just mental health, but physical health too, especially if it's
Absolutely.
unresolved and goes on for a long time. And so that's been a very large part of my practice. And it's not something that I actually I studied psychology, but I didn't actually study trauma per se. That's something that I learned by myself and through my patients mostly.
Hmm. Yeah. So, uh, and I probably said it wrong, but
Yes.
integrative medicine.
Yes. Yes.
So, were you always in that realm, or did you decide, no, because of all that I'm seeing, I need to really focus more on this?
So I actually started in integrative medicine and then I became even more integrated. Integrative medicine is such a strange field because it just means that you do more than one thing. And so it doesn't really, doesn't really define the profession very well, because you could be integrating, basket weaving therapy and toenail fungus therapy. You know what I mean? It doesn't,
Yes.
we could all be doing integrative medicine if you're doing two random different things. So, but I started, my integrative training was in Chinese herbal medicine and pharmaceuticals. So that was my integrating, and it was in internal medicine. So that was my launch was already in integrative medicine. And
Hmm.
I had training in a hospital in Shanghai that's what they did, integrative medicine. And then I came to the States after that, after I finished medical school, and then I studied acupuncture. So there's more stuff to add to that. And then I studied
Hmm.
psychology. So I integrated psychology into it, and then I integrated functional medicine and more nutrition. So I just put more things into my toolbox.
So as you're saying that, my mind is going, well, I could see you saying, well, I'm treating this person, but it would really, based on my reading and research or whatever, they really could benefit from acupuncture. So I should, or psychology. And so you realize, well, you didn't have that tool in your toolbox, but it would help someone. And I think, that's one benefit when your doctor has more things to help you that aren't a pill or a well, mostly not a pill or a powder or
Yes.
a shot, something that is more holistic, that doesn't have as many or any other reactions that you don't want to hear, you don't want to have.
Absolutely. And, I do want to be honest that even if you try alternative medicine, there sometimes can be unwanted effects that happens too. It's not like this, unfortunately, this magical thing and then you're 100% better. It's it's a little bit more complicated than that. Yes, it's nice to at least have options and to be able to say to patients, hey, I know that this didn't work for you, so why don't we try something else? And because otherwise, if you go to see a doctor who only does one thing, a lot of my patients feel quite dismissed when they're told that, it didn't work for them. That means that the message that they often get is, well, your disease isn't real, or you're making it up or something, especially if you're a woman, unfortunately.
Oh, I know exactly what you're talking about. My mother has been going through that for most of her life. So.
Oh, I'm so sorry. It's terrible. Awful. Yeah, that goes way back. Women and illness seen as some kind of psychological disorder, and that we're making it up just to inconvenience the medical profession. I went through that myself with my mysterious illness for a long time that was diagnosed a lot more recently. So I've had my own journey with that, but most of my patients that come in are often told your physical problem is all in your mind. It's awful. And it usually never is. It's usually always in the body.
Well, the interesting thing, we are talking about trauma, and I think some of the issues, because our mind is so powerful, our subconscious is so powerful, that I think sometimes that trauma, to escape that trauma so much, we really give our body issues that, physically we are hurting, we are sick, and there isn't any pill or anything to take it away until you deal with that trauma.
Absolutely. I do think that, in some cases, pain can be somatized in the body. And many people who do have psychological or emotional challenges will often say that the physical stuff is better than the emotional. So if they have more physical pain, they can concentrate on that because that's somehow more manageable than emotional pain. So I've heard that too.
Yeah. So what are some key concepts of being able to maintain a holistic lifestyle?
So it's a very individualized journey, finding what works for you as a whole person, what works for your physical body, what works in terms of your diet is going to vary a lot. And for example, and that can be to do with your race, for example, like, being an Asian person, I can eat a tremendous amount of carbohydrates and I don't really need a whole lot of protein. Yeah, nothing's really going to happen. It's like great. Like my body loves carbohydrates. But if you're Caucasian descent, that's probably not going to do great. You know what I mean? It's not great.
Trust
You're
me.
going to, you need like lots of protein, right? And I mean, I'm really making very generalized statements.
Yes.
So anyway, so just looking at that perspective, can you have like a raw diet, or do you have to have a mostly cooked diet? It's going to depend on how strong your digestive system is. how much fiber you need. I mean, these things are, it's a spectrum thing. So to realize that there's no such thing as a perfect diet, for example, for your body, and to really, it's trial and error. It's a lot of trial and error. Unless you have a doctor or nutritionist who really understands individualized medicine, you're going to be figuring this out. And most people really struggle with this earlier on in life. And, as you get older, and for women, if you go through menopause, your body completely changes and you have to relearn everything again. So it's not easy. It's very, very tricky. So you kind of have to pay attention, and the seasons also change what we need to eat. Like, for example, in the wintertime, you're not going to be able to eat a lot of salads and cold things. And you're going to need heartier foods that are more fattening, probably. So, so that's listening to your own body's needs is really important, right? And then emotionally, mentally, and spiritually speaking, again, they're all very, yes, absolutely. And to be able to listen to yourself and ask yourself, so what do I really need on a mentally, emotionally, and a spiritual level? And to be honest with yourself, because a lot of the time what ends up happening is that people tell themselves how they should be feeling rather than what they're actually feeling. And so there's a little bit of a discrepancy going on. And that's when we start getting into trouble, when we're not able to be honest. Like, for example, I had this patient recently, she kept saying, I just feel like I need to be a good little girl. But then she started realizing, I don't really want to be a good little girl. I need to be true to myself. And not that, she was saying, I'm going to tell the world where to go or anything like that. But there's, you know what I mean? There's like a middle path where you can be true to yourself and also be, honest with the world and how you feel and how you think, and find your own path, because that's an individual path as well. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Yeah. And, it's one of those things that, and I don't know for your practice, and I guess what I'm thinking is not a lot of people know how to, or are disciplined enough, maybe is the word I'm looking for, to sit and start to think about this. And so, what kind of questions do you ask? And I know that your patients, probably you can't spend all day with them, or, hours and hours to be able to pull it out of them. So what tools do you give them maybe to help them peel the onion to figure out, okay, what is best for you? How can you as that person, what is the best thing for you? Diet, sleep, all those things.
So in general, when most people come to see me, they do usually invest quite a lot of time and energy to figure a lot of this stuff out, because the majority of people who are coming to see me have chronic illnesses, and they've basically have seen dozens of different practitioners.
Right.
And so then I often tell them, the changes that you probably want to make in order for you to get better it's going to take time. So most people, especially at the beginning, are coming to see me once a week for a chunk of time. So it's kind of like a hybrid of therapy. So if you think about how much time it really takes for you to make those types of changes. So a lot of people will actually, I'll be seeing them quite frequently. So it's usually not a quick fix for most of these people. And there are some people that come in for something that's very acute, but I think in line of what you're asking, that it's that it does take a lot of time. And
that makes sense.
Yeah. And I usually tell people it's going to take me a little bit of time to figure out what's going on. And usually after a couple of times of seeing them, then I can usually give them a better prognosis, because then I've kind of worked out the pieces. Yeah. And
excellent.
Yeah. So the questions, sometimes I might ask them to keep a journal, just so that, because, and by the time most people come to see me, they're quite receptive, because they've been quite ill and they're sick of being sick. So they're willing to do the work. Occasionally I'll get somebody who's resistant and doesn't want to do anything, and is anticipating a magical pill or something. I'm not sure what they're thinking that I'm going to do for them.
Yeah. I completely understand where you're going. So for those who have experienced death of a loved one, that is a terrible trauma. So what are some steps that you recommend for them to heal so they get back to being resilient and finding joy again in life?
I think the number one thing is time. You cannot push the grieving process in
Right.
order to successfully, I shouldn't say successfully, grief requires grieving, and to go through all the steps, it is painful, it's
Mm-hmm.
exhausting. And I think that to recognize that it also kind of comes in chunks and waves, and it morphs, meaning that sometimes you could be feeling okay and then the next minute you feel terrible. And to be able to
Mm-hmm.
roll with all of that, and then to let the people around you know that I might check out for days, weeks on time because I'm not going to have the energy. You don't have to tell people if you don't want to, but just to
Mm-hmm.
recognize in yourself that it's a very up and down. And there are going to
Right.
be times when you need to shut down and shut the world out and just be inside yourself. And there were days, for example, where I slept more than, I would say, 14 hours a day because it was just so exhausting. So I would say to
Mm-hmm.
people, be very gentle with yourself. And I think the first 3 months is usually hell, just getting through that severe exhaustion phase.
Right.
And then once you get through that, then you can start processing. But that first year is, and going through all those different anniversaries where that person isn't there, is rough. And then by the time you get to that first anniversary, it's awful. But then after that, it usually shifts for most people. And there's a little bit of ease that comes in. Not to say that
Yeah.
it's easy, but it's a
Right.
little easier. And also to recognize that it is normal, that the grief will go on indefinitely, just to
Yeah.
understand that you never get over somebody, but you can move forward with your life.
Yeah, I know, a song can bring it on, a
Absolutely.
place, a smell, but I think it's important for the person that's going through the grief to understand this, but it's also important for her or his support system,
Yeah,
those around that, to understand and uh, not be overly trying to help, or also not, you know, if they do reach out to you, to be there for them, because some
absolutely.
people don't know what to say. And so I'm just going to kind of be not there for them. And I think that's not so good either.
It's such a difficult thing unless you've been through something where you've lost somebody that you're very close to. I don't think that most people really have that understanding of what it's like to go
Mm,
through a deep grief. And for the person who's been through it, they usually are able to navigate through that process and be there for the friend or not, because they understand the need for space or being there if that person needs you to be there.
yeah.
But for other people, it can just feel, if you haven't had that experience and you have a friend that's grieving and you know that they're grieving, it can be quite awkward. Like, should I reach
Hmm.
out? Should I not? Am I like, too in their face about like showing that I care? Or like, oh, I don't know what to say. So as you said, should I just disappear?
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
it's tricky.
Yeah. I had several of my friends whose husband unexpectedly passed away this
Oh, I'm
past year.
sorry.
And one of the things that each of them said was, I just wish people would stop asking me, how am I?
I know. I've heard that, because then you have to think about it. How am I feeling? And it's usually not great.
I know. It's like, well, what do you expect? Oh,
Yeah.
I'm just awesome. I'm great.
No.
No, no, no. So, so how do you find resilience after you've gone through that trauma? Because I think it's important that you were saying that it takes time,
Mm.
but, you know, do we give ourselves enough grace to take the time?
That's a good question. I'm not sure about everyone, but I would say a lot of people feel like they need to just kind of get their pants back on and just, face the world. And
Yeah.
which is good and all, because I do think that there is something to be said about that, and there is resilience in that too. But then you can be burning the candle at both ends if you really push yourself too much. But again, this is really an individual thing. But I do think that once the exhaustion phase passes, to then, when we're ready to come out into the world, one of the positive things about death is that recognition that we're here on the planet for not that long. And what do we really want to do while we're here? I think that's a really important message for us. And then to think, okay, well, was there anything that I was afraid to do or felt like I missed out on before? Because, nobody really wants to die with regret, right? And I think thinking about it from that perspective does help us with resilience, and to think, okay, I'm going to go out and do those things. Even if I'm afraid, even if I don't feel good, I'm going to live my life more fully. And I think that's important.
Yeah, for sure. We shared so many great tips, but time is flying by. So one last question.
Yes.
As you just touched on a little bit, you had a very, we'll say, interesting childhood. And what do you know now that you really wished you would have known in your 20s or 30s?
So I didn't really connect the dots about my mother's illness and the effect that had on me until I was much, much older. So now there's so much understanding about attachment disorders. Yeah, there's like many books around that. I had absolutely no idea what was going on. And I think that affected my relationships a lot when I was younger. And obviously led me, I think part of the reason why I actually ended up studying psychology was probably because I recognized there's something there that needs to be healed. And I wish I had known that part of myself, and how my mother had accidentally abandoned me because she was very sick. So I was neglected. And that, I think energetically, that was my first trauma. And I think working on that is probably what helped me. Seeing myself heal that, I think gave me a lot of insight and information to then share with other people. But I wish I had known that. That would have made my life so much easier. Yeah.
Yeah, I know some of the kids that I work with to teach leadership and self-confidence, the abandonment, if you will, of their parents makes them feel like, well, I must not be worth, if they left, this person I should trust, this person who should love me more than anything leaves or does things that takes them away from me. I must not be worth it. And so having to get through that, understanding that you are worth something, that you have to get through that before you have confidence to conquer the world, for sure.
Absolutely. And also when it happens at such a young age, when we're going through an egocentric developmental stage where you feel like they left you because you did something wrong. I think that's really at the core of that I'm not worthy. And to see that for what it is and recognize how you're feeling, and then to start changing that belief that, oh no, that they abandoned me, not because of me, but because of something that was external. And to see it for what it is, and then say, no, I'm worthy of whatever it is.
Yeah. You just hate to meet somebody that's in their 30s or 40s and then is just realizing, oh, I wasn't resilient, I wasn't strong, I found no joy because of this thing that I should have tried to. It would have been wonderful, obviously, to discover that, but if you don't have the resources, and that's why I love having people like you come on that maybe will make the journey a little bit better.
Absolutely. And thank you for saying that. But, the brain doesn't fully develop until we're 24, 25. So even if you have an awareness of it, you can't really fully process it until you're an adult anyway. I think that's my personal. You can work on it in therapy if you're lucky enough. But I think that majority of going backwards and doing that work happens at a later stage. Yeah, in life.
Most probably, yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, it's time now for me to share my screen. So if you are just watching, you want to go quickly grab a pen or paper to be able to get this information, but it will be, I'm sorry if you're just listening, it will be available on my YouTube channel, Vicki Nethling, so please subscribe, as well as my findyourleadershipconfidence.com. So for those listening, you will want to go to omniwellnessnyc.com, omniwellnessnyc.com. For Facebook, you can search her name, Momoko, Momoko Uno. And there's a lot of other things there, but just search her name, you'll find her. And then Instagram, same. You are now going to hear from Momoko to talk about what her call to action is for you. Things you'll find on her website. She has 2 websites you'll notice here. One is Momoko Writes as well, which is more of her literature. Her writings are there. So I'll have her talk about in both of those websites so that you can find the resources you need to either do some self-help or to actually reach out and connect with Momoko. So it's all yours.
Thanks so much. So Omni Wellness is a alternative medical center, and in that website is just basically my bio, and then all the other practitioners, amazing people that I work with. There's about 20 of us. So anybody who feels like they might have would like to try something that's outside the box in terms of it's not non-pharmaceutical based treatments. It's a great resource to go to. And then Momoko Writes, my writing website, that has some very simple coping mechanisms. There's a blog entry about breathing, which I think is very important in terms of overcoming trauma, because when you're in fight or flight, one of the most important things to do is learn how to slow down and control the breathing, because that is a very positive thing on the brain. It helps us to relax, and most people don't recognize that they're breathing very, very quickly when they're anxious. So there's some very easy techniques in there that I think that some people might find helpful.
Absolutely. Okay, so it's been just great chatting with you. You shared a lot of really important information, and I do hope that folks will visit both of your websites to see what you have out there that might be again, as I said, the start to a journey to either healing or discovering how they can find resilience, strength, and joy in their lives again.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And as always, I remind everyone that life is a journey, and it's up to you to enjoy the ride. This is Vicki Nethling, signing off.
Thank you for tuning into the Find Your Leadership Confidence podcast with Vicki Nethling, where we share impactful lessons that help you grow as an individual, grow your confidence, and find the positive and good within you so you powerfully and authentically become the best version of yourself. Remember to visit our website at www.findyourleadershipconfidence.com and enjoy even more great episodes like this one. Again, while you're here, subscribe to us via your favorite network. We look forward to seeing you next time on the Find Your Leadership Confidence podcast.